Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Big Blonde and Beautiful, the podcast. If you're new here, my name's Kara, and each week I pick a piece of media with fat representation in it, and I talk about the positives and the negatives and whether or not I think it's positive or negative fat representation. This week, we're going to be talking about the TV series Young Sheldon. Now, if you aren't familiar with this show, it actually just ended after its 7th season, so it's fairly new. Young Sheldon is a comedy series about Sheldon Cooper, a gifted child genius who grows up in the fictional town of Medford, Texas in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Sheldon is socially awkward and struggles to fit in with his family and friends, who also have difficulty understanding his intellectual abilities. The show follows Sheldon as he navigates a world where church and football are the norm. And if you've ever seen The Big Bang Theory, you know that that is not Sheldon's thing. And if you've never heard of a Young Sheldon, yes, it is a sort of prequel to The Big Bang Theory. Jim Parsons narrates it. All right, so the first thing I have to say about this show is it does have a lot of fat and mid-size representation. It does a good job of showing just like your everyday bodies. Like, not everyone is model thin, and I really do appreciate that. But the problem with this show lies in how it treats bigger bodies. So before we get to like the main person I want to talk about, I'm going to talk about some more of the side characters. So one of them is Billy Sparks, who is Sheldon's next door neighbor. He's the one that like owns the chickens. In the first episode that we see Billy, it's kind of implied that he's going to play more of a bully role because he kind of harasses Sheldon with a chicken. Also relatable because I'm scared of birds, and my friend had chickens when I was growing up, and I went nowhere near them. Nope. Anyway, so it's kind of implied that he's going to be a bully, but then they decided to take his character in a different direction, which, I mean, I do appreciate that they didn't make him into a bully because honestly, his character is just like a sweetie pie, and the show wouldn't be the same without Billy. But the problem with Billy is that he falls into a lot of fat stereotypes. Specifically, he's not the sharpest tool in the shed.
Hello, Billy Sparks.
Hey, Sean.
I am genuinely interested in you and would like to encourage you to talk about yourself, Billy Sparks.
Thank you.
You have the floor.
Thank you.
He's kind of clumsy. He is unintentionally funny. Like, people find his lack of common sense funny. But he is a lovable character overall. But we see that a lot with like Chris Farley characters or John Candy characters where they're like the lovable fat guy. And he also, Billy, struggles with like fitting in and finding specifically girls who are interested in him. I know there's one episode where his mom Brenda has to stop him from going on a date because the girl was totally faking it. Like, she had invited him to go to the movies and she was actually going to throw a party and just like not show up. So he does struggle with that. He has a crush on Missy, who is Sheldon's twin sister, and that never really develops in the show. I think there's like speculation that he might have been her first husband, and I kind of wish that they had explored that relationship a little bit more, but I'm worried that if they had, it would have been shown in more of like a Missy takes pity on him and then starts dating him and then realizes, oh, he's such a great guy, which I don't think would have been the best way to enter that relationship. No one really seems to comment on Billy's weight. I mean, one of the teachers, I think it's the principal, says that he will be a great football player because, you know, he's big, he has a big build. But he's really the, how do I want to put this? He's not outright bullied for his weight, but like it's implied. And I think also his smarts play into that too. So then, aside from Billy, we have other characters that are more background or like small side characters. Although Brenda does kind of have a bigger role, but her weight's not really talked about much except for when George is like bringing over cobbler and beer to like thank her for something, and she said that she was on her way to Weight Watchers, and he asks her, have you ever thought about picking up guys at Weight Watchers? She goes, no, they're all fat.
Can I offer you a beer and some thank you, cobbler?
Weren't you on your way somewhere?
Weight Watchers. What do you say?
Sure. You guys ever go to those Weight Watchers meetings?
Yeah, but they're all fat.
I'm like, girl, why are you going to Weight Watchers? It sounds like a pot calling the kettle black, okay? They don't have to be your preference, but we don't need to be like, ew, they're fat. Also, she's saying that to a fat man who she kind of has this chemistry with. So, like, make it make sense, because it doesn't. There's also Miss Ingram, who is a fat black female teacher at Sheldon Cooper's school. There's also the librarian, which I don't remember her name. Neither one of their weights are brought up. I'm just mentioning that, like, they're there taking up space, which I wholeheartedly appreciate. Although I do have to say that the librarian falls into the unlovable fat girl trope, where, like, she cannot find anyone to date her. She's sad, miserable, has a million cats. I'm like, listen, I don't have anyone to date me. I have a cat. He's currently chewing on plastic right now. I really hope that you can't hear it. But I'm fulfilled with myself and in my life. Like, I'm not sad about that. It'll happen when it happens, if it happens. But she really plays into that whole, like, my life is miserable. No one's ever going to love me because I look like this, like, type of thing. But Miss Ingram is just, like, there teaching her math and chilling. There's also an episode where the teacher isn't fat, but her name is Miss McElroy, and Sheldon's trying to make friends, and he finds this book, and Missy tells him, why don't you go talk to the people that checked out the book, because they're also looking for friends. And he's like, that's a good idea. So most of them are adults. I think actually maybe all of them are adults. But he goes up to Miss McElroy while she's eating her lunch, and she said that she was using the book to possibly become principal, like to learn more people skills. And he's like, well, did it work? And she said, are we sitting in the principal's office? And she's like, I want to live to see a woman as principal or something like that. And he's like, well, if you keep eating like that, you won't. And she says that eating junk food is the only thing that brings her joy. And then at the end, Sheldon mentions that would explain why when another male teacher, like however many years later, got the principal position over her, she became morbidly obese.
I wasn't interested in friends. I took out that book to help me become school principal.
Did it work?
Are we sitting in the principal's office?
No? So to be clear, you're not interested in making friends.
What I'm interested in is in living long enough to see women no longer treated like second-class citizens.
Well, if your goal is a long life, that chili cheeseburger is a step in the wrong direction.
Food is all I have.
2 years later, Mr. Givens became the high school principal, which might be why Ms. McElroy became morbidly obese.
And yes, he does say morbidly obese, because trust me, I would not say that on my own. I think that's all of the side characters. Now we're going to get to the main event, which is George Sr., or George Cooper, who plays the dad. Oh boy. Poor George. He is constantly bombarded with hateful comments from his mother-in-law, his wife, his kids, his friends, and his boss. Like, literally everyone in his life has to comment on his weight. In fact, I think that it would be easier to count the characters that didn't mention his weight than it would be to count the ones that did, because so many of them make some crack about his eating habits or his weight. Like, the worst of them is Meemaw, which really sucks because she is such a good character. Other than that, like, she's spunky. She doesn't let old age like hold her back. In fact, she uses that to be like, I've lived this long. Who knows how much longer I have to live? I'm gonna go do what I want. I'm gonna sleep with who I want. I'm gonna use my looks and womanly wiles to just like have a good time with these old men. I really love her character, and she doesn't take shit from anyone. But the problem is that her and George have a tumultuous relationship, which is kind of a play on, traditionally it's like mother-in-law and daughter-in-law that have a bad relationship, but in this instance it's mother-in-law and son-in-law, because son-in-law got her daughter pregnant as a teenager and then they ended up getting married and she didn't want that. But the thing is, she makes so many cracks about his body. Like, they go back and forth, but there's one where he's like, there's a person at the end of the table that eats for free, and she goes, there's another person at the end of the table that eats for $3. Like, Mary even comments on it. And the one time I can really remember, I know that she did another time, but is when he has a heart attack and she's like telling the doctor what's going on, and she's like, he's a fat man with chest pains, like, help him. And he goes, I thought you liked me like this.
I think my husband's having a heart attack.
I need an RRT and a crash cart.
Over here?
Sir, are you having chest pains right now?
Yeah, a little bit.
Any numbness or pain in your arms?
Maybe this one.
Shortness of breath?
Enough questions. He's a fat middle-aged man with chest pains. Do something. All right. Sorry about the fat, honey.
You said you like me this way.
The one thing I can say, though, is that his weight does not diminish Mary's love for him or lust for him. Like, they have a very active sex life and love life, and his weight and just size and everything doesn't seem to affect that at all, which I do think is a good thing, because, like, if you love someone, people are people, their weight's gonna fluctuate, but, like, your love shouldn't be dependent on their size if you truly love someone. So I do like that. That's at least one good thing with George. Then there's also one, even his pastor makes a crack at him. So there's a carnival, and George is trying to throw the ball at the target so that it's a dunk tank, and the pastor goes down into the water. And he's like, the pastor's trash talking, and he goes, maybe you should pray to the Lord for better aim. And George throws one again, and he misses, and he goes, I'll start. Dear Lord, please help George hit something other than the buffet.
Will you dunk him?
You got it.
You might want to pray to the Lord for better aim. I'll get you started. Lord, help George Cooper hit something other than the buffet.
Like, what? What was the reason? Why? Why? And the thing is, fat jokes are such low-hanging fruit. Like, it's so easy to make a fat joke. It takes a lot more brains and wit to make a joke about, like, someone's personality or something they've done, but making a joke about someone's body, literally, a 3-year-old can do it. Like, be better writers is what I have to say for that one. Like, be better than AI. It's really not hard. I wonder if that actor found it hard to go into a job where his weight was such a focal point. I haven't seen any interview or anything of him saying anything about that. He mostly is happy that people are getting to see someone like George on their screens, and I totally get that. But also, I know I would have a hard time going and working on a show where they're constantly talking about you. The thing that most people don't know about pilots, and I just learned in the last year is you shoot the pilot, it gets picked up, you sign the contract, and you don't necessarily know the details of what's going to happen to your character. So he didn't necessarily know that his character was going to be fat shamed, like practically every episode. So there's no way for him to like back out of it at that point, I don't think. So I feel like a lot of people would be like, well, just don't take the role. Well, the problem is there are not enough roles for fat people that are positive. And so he's trying to work. Listen, I do my best not to like come down too hard on fat actors, because maybe I would do it too if I was in the same position, you know? You do it too for a check. I was an employee and I was going to get employee of the month, and that's on period. So like you got to take what you got to take, but you also have to like stand up for yourself. So yeah, it's a hard one. Another thing I wanted to mention that's really common in sitcoms, I feel like, or just TV series with men in general, they don't even have to be bigger, is heart attacks. They love to give the father figures in shows heart attacks. I'm thinking Richard Gilmore had 2. George had 2, and then the third one killed him. So they just really love to do that. And then adding the fact that he's fat on top of that, I think it just, again, reinforces a harmful stereotype. And speaking of him biting the big one, you would think that at his funeral, people would have the decency to not bring up his weight or his eating habits. And you know what? You'd be wrong. Because Meemaw sure does. Mary starts to have a breakdown. And so Meemaw gets up there. And she starts talking about how she's going to miss him. You know who won't miss him? The cows, you know, because he eats a lot of brisket and just eats a lot in general.
I know this is hard for everyone. It's certainly hard for me. But no one is more upset with George's passing than the Lone Star Beer Company. That flag is at half-mast. On the other hand, there's a lot of cows out there that are breathing a sigh of relief as the king of brisket has put down his fork and ridden off into the sunset.
And the thing is, I should have been more surprised than I was, because that was their relationship. What else was she going to talk about other than cracking jokes about his weight and things? Because they didn't have like a heart-to-heart relationship. They didn't have anything other than that surface level, like going back and forth at each other. So it's a shame. I think it was really unnecessary. I think it kind of, at least for me, it took away from the funeral and just that whole scene. So I would have loved to have not seen that. Another thing I wanted to address is the lack of discussion and discourse around the fat phobia in this show. So whenever I do an episode, especially one by myself, I do research beforehand. I try to see what's been written about it, positive or negative, you know, both sides. Nothing. Not a thing. Not positive or negative. And I was really surprised because I at least thought there would have been some discussion about it from like bloggers or anything like that. So what did I do? I took it upon myself to post in a Reddit forum and just ask people like if they had any thoughts about it. And a lot of people brought up the fact that this show is set in the 80s and 90s. And, you know, I mean, fat phobia still happens today, but it was a lot more blatant and a lot more acceptable back then. I would argue, unfortunately, a lot of the time it's still acceptable, vis-a-vis this show airing. But the issue is there has to be a balance where we recognize that this show or other shows or movies are taking place in the past when certain things were more okay than they are now. But those writers still have to recognize that those things still have real world effects and real world consequences. So yes, would that have been normal to be that blatantly fat phobic? Possibly. I don't know. I wasn't alive in the 80s and 90s. I'm a 2000s girl, okay? But just because it was normal doesn't mean that we need to see it on our screens. Like, who is that helping? Who is that educating? And I know you're probably thinking it's a sitcom, it's not meant to educate. And you're right. For the most part, it's just meant to be more of a lighthearted thing that you can watch, nice 30-minute, we have a character arc that happens, a story arc that happens, wrapped up in a neat little bow. But the thing is with this, with having the fat phobia, it really made me think, like, what is that balance? Because also as fat people, we know that we get bullied. We know that people say things about our weight, whether to our face or behind our back. So we don't need to see it on screen. Been there, done that. We can be done with that. So like I said before, be better than AI. Write better material. We don't need the fat phobic jokes or whatever you want to call them, okay? I don't think that it being set in the 80s and 90s justifies the just lack of awareness on how that can affect people. Because I truly enjoyed watching the show. I go back and rewatch it. But every time they make a fat joke, I cringe. And another thing that I wanted to talk about before we wrap up is the fact that even myself and other fat people, and this also was talked about in the Reddit forum, we are so quick to overlook the fat phobia. Because we're like, it has all these other things going for it. It's just hating on people that look like me. So, I'm just going to ignore that and continue to enjoy the show. And obviously, I'm guilty of it too. And part of me is like, there's nothing wrong with that. You enjoy something. But another part of me is like, but maybe if we stopped giving these shows the platform and started really paying attention to what we watch and what it says about, people who are different, people with disabilities, minorities, things like that, maybe they'd actually be forced to take a look and make sure that their shows are not harmful or rude towards those groups of people. So, just a little thought to leave you with. It's time for the verdict. So, positive or negative fat representation? I'm definitely going to have to go negative on this one. These characters have their moments, but overall, like, there are so many episodes where they crack fat jokes at George or someone else, and it's just not good. And then a lot of the fat characters fall into stereotypes and tropes that are just harmful and overplayed. So I really have to go negative on this one, even though, like I said, I enjoy the show. All right. Well, I think that's all for this episode. Thank you all so much for listening. I really hope that you enjoyed it. Please, if you did, rate us 5 stars, like us, follow, subscribe, all the things. You can follow the podcast on TikTok at bbb.thepodcast and Instagram at bbb.podcast. And you can follow me, your host, on all social media at Carolina Howie. That's Carolina with a K. And until next time, stay fat and fabulous. Bye.